Good morning, sir.
Good morning, friend. Actually, can I get your chair? Ask her to bring it now.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Ah,
Good morning, sir.
good morning, Akshay.
How are you, sir?
Not good, Akshay. Shall we get going? People, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Shall we start off?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay. Uh, the just to recollect what we were doing the other day, the last class, we were talking about the um, experimental method used this experimental method is called the method of logical abstraction. And I told you, Machiavelli Machiavelli um, abstracted society completely and concentrated on the imperium. We cannot yet say state. At this point, the word state hadn't yet come into being. And what Machiavelli was talking about was essentially principalities. So I uh, he concentrated on the imperium and abstracted society. So what we have uh, in Machiavelli is the political or politics with no mention of society, religion, and ethics.
Sir, we completed Machiavelli, isn't it? We are at Hobbes.
I'm coming there, sir. I'm aware of that. I'm coming to Hobbes. So this is what I said he had done. And in doing so, he had redefined what the political and politics meant. He created these phrases outside of the Greek polis, which didn't exist then. So he became the founder of politics. What is wrong with me? This is Machiavelli's greatest contribution, where without there being a police, he created politics. Not only did he create politics and the political realm, you will also see that he was somebody, in order to establish the political realm and to remove ethics from political governance in the imperium. Please don't call it state yet. That will go to Hobbes, that credit. So he became the founder of politics as we know them, because Aristotelian politics are those which are rooted in ethics, whereas Machiavellian politics are those which are completely divorced uh, from the idea of ethics. And that is why he even said, means justify ends. Machiavelli was one of the most important um, people to have influenced Thomas Hobbes. Please remember, hey, please don't, please remember that, yeah, no, what was this? Yeah, Hobbes also uses the method of logical abstraction, but differently. So before I go to how uh, Machiavelli Hobbes uses the method of logical abstraction. Uh, he basically he basically gives us a certain scheme of things, and it is in this scheme of things that we actually find um, the mention of the state. Okay, so if Machiavelli was proto-modern, which is what I've told you, sorry, uh, then Hobbes is proto-liberal. But we'll get into that in a bit. What we need to understand is the scheme of philosophy that was followed by Thomas Hobbes. What was it that he was trying to prove? Now, the most well known writings of Hobbes are the Behemoth, the Leviathan, and he also wrote an essay in Latin called which gets translated as the citizen, but it is not. It is a civic person. That's how you have to look at cive, as a civic person, not as a citizen. Okay, please remember that. For students of political science, uh, the only work that really matters is the Leviathan. You can see that Hobbes has a fascination with all things which are very big, all things which are absolutely. I thought I had got rid of this. Uh, so he wrote about things which are huge. A behemoth is also huge. A leviathan is again something that is huge. And in fact, I remember uh, a poem written by uh, Percy Bysshe Shelley, P.B. Shelley, uh, who took part in the Greek war and died there, though he was an Englishman and he died very young. He died when he was 25. Uh, Even John Keats died very young, but he died of natural causes, I think. Uh, though some people say he died of consumption, which was the word for tuberculosis in those days. And some people say he was a drunkard. I'm not going to go into all those. I don't know which of them is right. But even John Keats died very young, and both Keats and Shelley were contemporaries. Please forgive me, but I cannot remember the title of the poem that Shelley wrote about the Greek war, in which he claims there is a line which says, uh, I hereby sail in the oak Leviathan towards a purpose which is yet to unfold in front of me. So, ships in those days were made of oak. So, that's why he calls it the oak Leviathan. Uh, so, a Leviathan is that which is very big. Now, when Hobbes wrote the Leviathan, there was a reason why he wrote it. The reason that Hobbes wrote, no, let's not go there first. Let us see what is the scheme that Hobbes follows um, in the Leviathan. Well, I'm simplifying it a bit. It starts with what he calls he proceeds to the execution of the social contract in order to overcome the state of nature, and in overcoming Hobbes creates the state and society in that order. He creates the state and society in that particular order. So Hobbes is one of the first thinkers to use the idea of a social contract. As well as that of the idea of the state. So let us look at Hobbes and his entire theory. So, what is Hobbes saying? Hobbes is saying that people originally lived in a state of nature. Okay. Which is pre social and pre political. He says that in the state of nature, people sprout out of the ground, not people. People sprout out of the ground like mushrooms do, and therefore these people are not aware of society, commodious living, and the state of nature is a war of all against all, because the individuals in the state of nature have what Hobbes calls Due to this, individuals have an entitlement over everything in the state of nature. And because of that, the life in the state of nature is solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. So, this is how things begin for Hobbes when he talks about the state of nature. Some people also equate it with his chapter on the kingdom of darkness. Uh, so these are basically people who have been given natural rights. Now, let us be very careful in our definition of natural rights. The definition of natural rights is that which is uh, an entitlement given to the individual over everything and anything available in nature. Everybody has a right to it. Everybody has a an entitlement to it. And because everybody has a right to it, and because everybody has an entitlement to it, they basically come into conflict with each other, and therefore uh, there is no society. There is nothing like living a life together. Uh, and he says people mushroom, sorry, sprout out like mushrooms from the ground. And therefore, they are all fighting against everyone else. So the state of nature in Hobbes is a picture of a war of all against all. People are, this is pre-social, pre-political, which means there is no organization of any kind to the life of people in the state of nature. There is nothing there. They're all fighting against each other.
Sir,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
was there no kind of authority or a king to look after
No,
in the pre-political stage?
no. If it is, if there is an authority, then it would have become some kind of either a society or a political authority.
Okay.
If either of them existed, I mean, if authority existed, it would either be political authority or it would at least be social authority, right? Which is what you do not find in Hobbes. You don't find in Hobbes, there's no authority. So people are solitary. Life in the state of nature is solitary, nasty, because everybody's fighting everyone, brutish, because they are uncivilized, and it's short. When you're fighting all the time, you don't have longevity of life. Longevity of life is absolutely absent. So, this is how he characterizes the state of nature. Okay, war of all against all. Now, he suddenly adds a quality to the individual. People might be living in a state of nature where life is short, nasty, brutish, and solitary, but he basically says that this is something which is what should I say? This is a quality which differentiates the human being from other animals. The quality of rationality. That is what he adds. After having added that on, he argues life in the state of nature is not good for him because of his rational ability, which sets him apart from other animals, lesser animals, In fact, he doesn't seem to refer to man as an animal anywhere. He refers to him only as man. So it's not like the Aristotelian thing where you say man is a social animal. So for him, uh, due to the existence of the rational faculty, man realizes that the state of nature is not good for him. And this is what comes out of acting too smart. Uh, this is state of nature. Okay, man wants to come out of the state of nature because of his rational faculty. So, how does he come out of the state of nature? That is the question. Man comes out of the state of nature by entering into a social contract. Actually, it should be in man comes out of the so, state of nature by entering into a social contract which is rational and takes man into please don't forget, please do not forget that it is in this order. It's called a social contract. But the social contract is that which first leads to the setting up of a state, and then comes society. This is the unique thing about Hobbes. No other political thinker anywhere in time will tell you that something like a state or the equivalent of a state, which could be an imperium, it could be a polis, any of these things, they don't precede society. In Hobbes, it precedes society. So,
Sir,
yes, ma'am.
when he says state of nature, he exactly meant the conditions which were prevailing before the formation of a society.
Yes,
Okay.
that
Why? What's the literal meaning state of nature?
state here in this instance, state of nature is a reference to the nature of existence.
Okay.
You say, my mental state is not very good, right?
Hmm.
By that we mean that you're mentally not feeling right. You may be agitated, you may be angry, you may be depressed. Okay, so that state is not the state as an institution, but
Right.
it is something which is in the nature of something like a state of affairs.
Okay.
So the state of nature is a state of affairs. It is not a state.
Hmm.
It's not a state. Okay, so please
Yes.
remember that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So the state of nature after the social contract leads to the not setting, creation of a sovereign authority who is the Leviathan, and then to the state as an institution and society. That is the order in which things move. So the state of nature after the social contract first leads to the creation of sovereign authority, which he calls the Leviathan. We will discuss why he calls it the Leviathan, or calls. Um, Let me not get ahead of myself. Uh, so first you have the sovereign authority, then you have the state, and state as an institution, and then you have society. And this is what makes Hobbes extremely unique. He's very, very unique because you don't find any other political philosopher who says anything like this. Can you excuse me a minute, please? I think I have to throw up. Please excuse me a minute. Please excuse me, I'm extremely sorry. Uh, Actually, what has happened is that this is what happens when you don't tell your doctor all the medicines that you're taking. The mistake I made is that I didn't tell my doctor that I was taking trazodone, and my doctor gave me tramadol, which is an opioid, uh, to kill the pain because it's been really, really bad. It's been very, very bad for the last 3 days. And what has happened is that tramadol, which is an opioid, and trazodone, which is a serotonin uh, uh, receptor inhibitor, they don't get along. So this retching and nausea started. Luckily, something told me that I should tell my doctor. I told him, and he said, stop all painkillers. And then he said, let's see if we can have naproxen. And I told him, but I also take meritazapine for my neurological problem. Please see if there is anything between meritazapine and naproxen and any other. And he said they don't get along. So he said no painkillers except paracetamol. And it hardly works. It doesn't even cure me of a headache. And this pain that I have is terrible because I have already slipped 4 discs in my back. And I'm sorry, why am I telling you all this? Let me get on with the class. Sorry again. So uh,
Ah, sir, you're feeling okay? I mean, you can continue the class by sitting.
I will continue the class. I'm not feeling okay, but I don't have the luxury of not continuing the class, so let's continue. Uh, yeah, so the sovereign authority is the Leviathan, and then that leads to the state, which is for the first time perhaps somebody is using it as an institution, and then that leads to society. Um, that is what makes uh, that is what makes sovereign. Sorry, that is what makes the Hobbesian social contract very, very unique. Now let's try to understand that people have been critical of Hobbes. Many people have been critical of Hobbes, and all of them give different reasons, but ultimately, what they are saying is that there is an illogic in Hobbes. There is a very, very big illogic in Hobbes. And what is the illogic? The illogic is in the nature of an anomaly that Hobbes created in the state of nature. Now he's saying in the state of nature, there's no society. It's pre-social, and individuals are sprouting out of the ground. So he's not even saying that they have parents. And it is a war of all against all, because nature has given rights and entitlements. So everybody is using their rights and entitlements against each other, which makes it a war of all against all. And by making it a war of all against all, uh, the state of nature is lawless, unruly. Now, if this was a lawless and unruly state of nature. Why does Hobbes suddenly introduce rationality? So somebody like Leo Strauss raises a question which he says is, if man is rational in the state of nature, why does the state of nature have to exist the way it does? Leo Strauss, in fact, compares uh, the state of nature and Locke. The state of nature and Locke, which of course I will discuss in detail uh, when we come to him, uh, which will be quite soon, hopefully. So, in this state of nature of Locke, there is no war of all against all. It doesn't seem to be pre-social. So he says, why is Hobbes's state of nature like this? And why is he talking about a social contract suddenly? And he's saying people enter into a social contract because of the fact that they are rational. Now, if they are rational in the first place, what are they waiting for? What are they waiting for? If they are rational, immediately they should come to the realization that they can't exist in a state of nature and should move out of the state of nature. But why do they have to wait, fight each other? Why do they have to wait for all this? So that is what Leo Strauss says. Strauss says. And in a similar vein, you have George Sabine, who basically argues that the state of nature shouldn't exist at all if if human beings are rational. It shouldn't exist at all. And he takes severe objection to this particular idea that you know, people sprout out of the ground, individuals sprout out of the ground like mushrooms. He said, what kind of a construct is that? By then, there was enough progress in science, and he says what Hobbes is writing at the time in which he is writing, in his own words, is utter rubbish, because in a time when science itself has progressed uh, to an extent where people are able to understand things much better than they did in the past, why is Hobbes going back to a time when people didn't understand things? So, what is this problem that Hobbes has, that he has to talk about the state of nature, the kind of state of nature that he talks about? So, and then he has a problem with The fact that he says people are creating a sovereign authority. How are they creating a sovereign authority if they are fighting with with everyone else? At what point do they converge together? At what point do they converge together and say, let us sit and discuss how we can overcome the state of nature? Who takes the lead? In the absence of a leader, who takes the lead? So these are the questions Sabine, some people call him Sabine, some people call him, I don't know. So this is the questions that Sabine raises. And then there's Gettel, and Gettel basically calls Hobbes a master of illogic. He says that his whole work, the Leviathan, is steeped in meaninglessness. It is steeped completely in meaninglessness because of the fact that you're saying man is rational, man is this, that, and then you're saying all these things. And then you're saying man will enter into a contract. So he says that, there is absolutely no meaning to most of the things that Hobbes talks about. And again, most of them are completely put off by this idea that individuals sprout out of the ground like mushrooms. It is something that has surprised everyone. It's only after the hermeneutics were brought into social sciences in some measure, it's only after that that you see that there is a proper understanding of Hobbes and Machiavelli. Otherwise, Leo Strauss had called Machiavelli a preacher of evil. Okay, Leo Strauss is very, very vehemently anti-Machiavelli. And a number of people who were commentators and philosophers in their own right, but who were Christians, found Machiavelli to be totally unacceptable. It is after the whole idea of interpretation came to the forefront that we see that people have tried to understand. Now, obviously, nobody in his right mind will write a book that is illogic or based in illogic. Nobody will write a book that is illogical. Why would you write a book that is illogical? You will have to basically, at some point, understand why somebody has written a book the way he has written it, instead of straight away jumping onto it and saying that this is utter rubbish, senseless. So you find sympathetic writers coming up in the 20th century who seem to have understood the social contractualists as well as Machiavelli a lot better than some of their predecessors did. I mean, even Leo Strauss and George Sabine, all of them are their 20th century figures, but they have not paid enough attention to the question, why does somebody write a book like this? Either he must be demented, no mind of his own, he wrote some rubbish, or maybe there's something deeper. Maybe there's something deeper in him. So you have Quentin Skinner, who completely changes the interpretation of Machiavelli. He sees Machiavelli's purpose as a desire to establish an independent realm of politics and governance, which is not controlled by religion. He wants something which is irreligious because he didn't like Christianity. He believed that Christianity limited the potential of the human being, which is what you'll find later on, even in Nietzsche. So even Machiavelli in the discourses, he says, what is this thing that we are sinners by birth? That at every stage we have to apologize. Every prayer begins with, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." It begins with that. So he said, what kind of a religion is this, which is constantly telling you that you're a sinner, you're no good? So Skinner is the one who interprets him properly, and the Machiavelli we see in Skinner is very, very different from the Machiavelli we see in writers like Ernest Cassirer or Walter Pater, all these people who castigate him, and Leo Strauss, who calls him a preacher of evil. So Skinner is the one who, Quentin Skinner, not B.F. Skinner. If you're writing Skinner, please write Quentin Skinner, because B.F. Skinner is a psychologist, uh, not a political science person, whereas Quentin Skinner is. Anyway, so now if you look at other forms of scholarship that have come up about Hobbes, you'll find that the first thing they all acknowledge, by they all, I mean people like Michael Oakeshott, Oakshott, Michael Oakeshott, C.B. Macpherson, 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 and David Gauthier, Gauthier. David Gauthier, all of them are far, far more sympathetic and realistic in the understanding of Hobbes and the purpose of Hobbes. What they are doing basically is using
Sir,
yeah,
there was an influence on Hobbes before the, in his times of what was going on in England, and that's why maybe he considered, man as nasty, brutish, and all because of the
yeah,
war, because of what he experienced.
very true.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah,
and maybe he had a
um,
first pessimistic view. Later on,
no,
he
no,
added the
no,
rationality.
no. He didn't have a pessimistic view at all. Hobbes didn't have a pessimistic view at all. Hobbes's view is extremely optimistic, very, very optimistic.
But he says man sprouts out of the ground, and he's solitary, brutish.
And I'll explain that in
Yes,
a minute. Let me explain that in a minute.
yes.
Yeah, sure. So people started following this idea. In order to understand a text, you have to understand the context. Yeah, so you have this text in context or ideas in context. This is what was, if you remember, Dilthey. If you remember, shut up, please. If you remember Dilthey was saying exactly this, okay, that you have to see everything in the context in which it is written. And that is when you establish intersubjectivity, and that leads to the objective mind. So Dilthey believed that you could place yourself in the position, you could place yourself in the position that, uh, what should we say? You could place yourself in the position that people place, sorry, in the position that the author was in. That is basically what Dilthey argued, which a postmodernist like Gadamer uh, disputes. But I think while there is some sense to what Gadamer does say, I still like the idea of what Dilthey advocates uh, when he is basically talking about, uh, you know, uh, reaching the objective mind. Maybe the total reaching of the objective mind is not possible, but it is a pretty good idea to try and reach an objective mind. In doing so, you just might uncover a few things which you otherwise wouldn't have come out at all. So, what is the ideas in context or a text in context? Now, there are two ways of looking at a text. Did I tell you what a text is actually? Did we have a discussion about why it is called a text, a piece of writing?
Yes, sir, we had this discussion.
You remember why it's called that? Hmm? Text is a Greek word for weaving. So you weave a cloth by putting the threads together. You weave a text by putting the threads together and make a cloth out of it. That's why they're called textiles. And you touch a cloth and say texture. So a text is nothing but a composition of words. Okay. Now, there are two ways in which you can look at a text. It is either you look at it as a finished product, or you say, no, it is not a finished product. If you say it is a finished product, if you say it is a finished product, then your basic contention is whatever you think is, how do I put it? Whatever you think is, whatever you see is in the text is what there is to know, and nothing else is important. So a text is a body that has in itself all the things that you need to know about it. All the things that you basically need to know about it are contained within the text. That is the traditional way of looking at a text. And that is precisely the reason why you have people misinterpreting philosophers. We've talked about how Karl Popper and his interpretation of Plato is completely atrocious. It is completely atrocious. You call him totalitarian, enemy of open society. Karl Popper has no idea about the Greek society, Greek history of the time of Plato. And therefore, he's come up with these atrocious labels. Absolutely atrocious labels, right? And similarly, very similarly, when you are looking at Hobbes, people have tended to treat the Leviathan as a finished product, and therefore they have come out with equally terrible interpretations, calling him names, calling him, I think Gettel is the one who says Hobbes is almost stupid. That is what he says. Just because he's reading the text. But please understand one thing. Please understand one thing, that if you don't know the context in which a text has come into being, you probably will never understand it. You probably will never understand it properly. Or if you're dealing, in fact, I was once watching a documentary on the Zoque civilization, which flourished in the uh, Central American part of the world. Now, the Zoque civilization is fascinating, very, very fascinating, because somehow they lived on almost unreachable places in mountains where there were caves. Till date, it is a something that is, what should I say? Till date, it is something that nobody has found. How did they get into those spaces? How did people live up there? And when they have dug up a burial ground, they have found skeletons of very little children, babies, with their heads bashed in, with their frontal lobes being bashed in, apparently by rock or whatever. And most of the anthropologists, their conclusion was that the Zoque are not civilized. They're not civilized at all, because is this how a civilization treats people? Does it bash in their skulls? Now, the thing is, you are not in a position. Please stop it, you stupid mutt. Stop it. I'm sorry. I don't know. My wife leaves them here so that her class is not disturbed. My class can get disturbed. Life's like that. Okay. Um, so we know so little about the Zoque. We don't know why they lived up there. And can you pass a judgment on an entire civilization based on two things. One was this bashed in skulls. Two, they found a sample of feces, and when they tried to see the contents of the feces, it's fossilized, of course, and they found human DNA in it, and they found two sets of human DNA. So they concluded that the Zoque were cannibals. The Zoque people were cannibals because otherwise, how did two DNAs get into one? Could be that of the person whose feces they collected, and the other, they say, is that of somebody that they ate, a human being. Now, this is extrapolation of just one instance to an entire civilization and saying that the Zoque ate were cannibals. So that doesn't stand the test.
So can you spell the word Zoke?
ZOQE.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't condemn them like that. We don't know what was what. So people therefore say that any idea, whether it is in the form of a written idea, and we've talked about philology, right? Philology includes the study of ideas which are not just written, but also spoken word, things that are transmitted uh, by word of mouth. And what better example do we have than our own Sanskrit texts of today? But at one time, it was just spoken word. It went from one generation to another as purely spoken word. So if you look at that, if you basically look at that, then people said you can also interpret spoken word. You can interpret spoken word by putting it in a context. And you cannot judge certain practices of the past by saying that they are barbaric. These are practices that nobody should have. So, what you really need to remember is this idea that never ever treat something which is in the nature of a text as something which is a finished product in itself, or an idea as a finished product in itself. For example, if you take toilet habits, I don't know why, but most of the world seems to be using paper. They use paper. You know for what? I don't have to tell you, since I told you it's a toilet habit. To me, that seems like very, very untidy, unclean. And to them, it might seem, what is wrong with these fellows? Why do they need water? So, there is a thing called cultural relativism, which doesn't come into being only when you're talking about things of the past, things of many centuries ago, even contemporary times. What is acceptable in certain places is not acceptable in other places. Sorry for this example, but premarital sex is no big deal in America, in Europe. Public show of affection, kissing each other in public, no big deal for them. We are a more modest kind of a people. Our men insist on virginity of women. They don't insist on their own. And we don't have a public display of emotions. So, this is cultural relativism. You can't say my culture is better than that. That is why I said ethics should be differentiated from morals. We are considering ethics as morals. By the time Hobbes has come into being, ethics begin their separation from morals. They begin their separation from morals. And that process is completed in John Locke. So tomorrow, when I meet you, hopefully I'll still be alive. I will be talking about this whole thing of text in context and how, when you do it, already Madam Padma has given an indication of what is to come. So I don't think it's going to be such a difficult task because I'm sure even Akshay is familiar with this because we discussed this a bit while we were doing Rawlsian liberalism and libertarianism. So tomorrow we'll pick that up and try and finish off as much of Hobbes as possible. Please do come for this evening's class. It'll be a shortish class, but I want to finish off that multiculturalism before I lose the thread. So 5:30, please come and I'll finish that multiculturalism of William Lika. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
Take care,
Thank you.
sir. Bye.
Yeah.